The wind howled across the empty plains like the cry of a mourning mother. The sun had already begun to bleed into the horizon, painting the desert gold and red. A cruel beauty that mocked the dying man sprawled among the jagged rocks below. His horse was gone, his rifle empty, and his blood soaked into the sand like ink, disappearing into parchment. The world around him blurred and shimmered with heat. Somewhere above, a hawk circled lazily, waiting for death to do its work. His name was Caleb Reed, a cowboy with eyes like weathered steel, and a past too heavy to carry. The land had turned against him, the riverbed dry, the sky merciless. He'd been hunted for 3 days by men wearing the same star he once swore to protect. Once a deputy, now branded an outlaw. Caleb's only crime was defending what he believed was right. But the law cared little for truth, and less for mercy. His vision dimmed as the last light faded behind the ridgeline. Dust clung to his lips, mixing with the taste of blood. He tried to move, but his body betrayed him. The bullet in his side had done its work, slow and cruel. Caleb thought of home, of the cabin near the creek that no longer ran. He thought of the horse that once trusted him, and of the men who'd turned their guns on him. He thought, perhaps, that this was where his story would end, nameless, forgotten, swallowed by the desert wind. But fate had other plans. From the rim of the canyon, a figure appeared, tall, silent, wrapped in the colors of dusk and shadow. The stranger moved with the grace of a wildcat, each step deliberate, cautious. As the last of the sun's fire flickered across the cliffs, Caleb saw the outline of a woman. Long hair braided with beads that caught the dying light, skin bronzed by sun and battle, eyes sharp as the edge of a blade. She was Apache proud, untamed, and feared across the territory. Yet her gaze held something unexpected. Not hatred, not pity. Something older, deeper, recognition perhaps. She studied the cowboy for a long moment, her hand resting near the knife at her waist. The wind whispered around them, carrying the faint rattle of her horse's reins. Then, without a word, she descended the slope, her moccasins barely making a sound on the rock. Caleb blinked, unsure if she was real or a spirit sent to guide him into death. His heartbeat slowed, the edges of the world softened. But the woman's movements were too precise, too human. She knelt beside him, eyes scanning the wound, her expression unreadable. The smell of sage and leather surrounded her. She pressed her hand against his wound, firm, unflinching, and Caleb gasped. Pain lanced through him, and his eyes snapped open. Her face was close now. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, like the hum of the earth itself. He couldn't make out her words. They came to him like echoes from a dream, but there was no malice in them, only decision, purpose. The woman tore a strip from her tunic, dipped it in water from a small gourd at her side, and cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness. She worked quickly, efficiently, like someone who had seen too much death to hesitate anymore. When she was done, she reached for her horse, a dark, strong mare with eyes as intelligent as her own. The cowboy felt her lift him, impossibly strong for her size, and lay him across the saddle. His body protested, his vision swam, but still she worked. The last thing he heard before darkness claimed him was the whisper of her voice. Calm, commanding, the horse began to move, steady and sure beneath him. The world tilted and swayed, the sound of hooves merging with the rhythm of his fading heartbeat. When he woke, it was to the crackle of fire and the smell of smoke and pine. The stars above were brilliant, fierce, unbroken by cloud or distance. The Apache woman sat across from him, tending the fire, her expression unreadable. Her face glowed softly in the light, the lines of her features sharp and proud. She did not look at him, but he felt her awareness all the same, constant, unyielding. He tried to speak, but his throat refused. She handed him a cup made from a hollowed horn. The liquid burned as it went down, bitter and hot, but it steadied him. Somewhere nearby, her horse shifted and snorted. He didn't know why she had saved him. A white man, a stranger, and likely her enemy. Maybe it was duty, maybe pity, or maybe something else altogether. Whatever her reasons, He owed her his life now. The desert stretched around them, vast and eternal, the wind carrying secrets only the old stones remembered. The Apache woman looked up at the sky, then back at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight like twin embers. For the first time in days, Caleb felt something stir inside him that he thought he'd lost long ago. Hope, but the desert was not done with them yet. The sound of distant riders echoed faintly across the canyon, the kind of sound that makes the earth hold its breath. The woman turned sharply toward the noise, her hand resting again on her knife. The fire flickered low, and the night seemed to lean in. The storm was coming. The night stretched cold and long, stitched with distant thunder and the whisper of hooves upon hard earth. The Apache woman, her senses sharpened by years of surviving this unforgiving land, felt the tremor before she heard the sound. Men were coming, the kind who rode without light, who spoke only in gunfire and left nothing but dust behind. She rose from where she sat by the fading fire, her movements as silent as the shadows that clung to the rocks. The cowboy lay near the flames, still weak but breathing steadier than before. The wound she had cleaned was holding, though his face remained pale beneath the stubble and grime. He did not stir as she gathered her gear, but his breath quickened, as if some instinct in him recognized the shift in the air, danger closing in. The Apache woman moved with purpose, dousing the fire until only faint smoke trailed upward like a ghost. Her mare flicked its ears, restless but obedient. She listened. The riders were still miles away, but the sound carried easily in the cool desert night. They were many, maybe 5, maybe more. Men hunting through the night like wolves. She turned to the cowboy, studied him for a long moment. He was still too weak to stand, but leaving him behind meant death, for him, and possibly for her, too. She had saved him once, but the desert demanded more than one act of mercy. It demanded a choice, and she made it. With the strength born from necessity, she pulled him upright, slinging his arm over her shoulder. He groaned faintly, but did not wake. His weight was heavy, but her resolve heavier still. She mounted the mare and pulled him across behind her, steadying him with one arm as she guided the horse away from the camp. The animal obeyed without hesitation, hooves muffled on the sand. The stars above were sharp and cold, and the moon had slipped behind a curtain of clouds. They moved swiftly, hugging the canyon wall, following the narrow path that led into the maze of stone and shadow known by her people as the Sleeping Serpent. Few dared to travel it at night, for it was said the spirits of the old warriors still haunted its depths. But she feared no ghosts, only men. Behind them, the riders drew closer. She could feel their anger, a burning thing carried on the wind. Whoever they were, they hunted with purpose, perhaps bounty men, perhaps lawmen, or perhaps just killers chasing blood for the thrill of it. It made no difference. The canyon walls rose higher as she guided the horse into the serpentine passage, their surfaces gleaming faintly in the starlight. Every sound echoed, the breath of the horse, the soft jingle of reins, the low hum of her own heartbeat. The cowboy shifted slightly, a weak breath escaping him, his head resting against her back. She did not turn, but her jaw tightened. She remembered another time, another wounded soul, years ago, when her tribe had been driven from their lands, hunted like animals. She had learned then that mercy was a knife with 2 edges. Yet still, something deep within her refused to let this one die. Perhaps it was madness, perhaps destiny. The path narrowed until it seemed the canyon itself would swallow them whole. She urged the horse forward, each step measured and silent. Then a faint glint caught her eye, light flickering against metal far behind. The riders had entered the canyon. Their torches glowed faintly in the dark, dancing like fireflies of doom. She pressed the mare onward, whispering a command in her native tongue. The horse obeyed, quickening its pace through the winding passage. Loose stones clattered beneath hooves, echoing like the distant drumming of war. At last they reached the heart of the canyon, a hollow where the walls opened slightly to reveal a small stream trickling from between the rocks. It was a sacred place once, used by her ancestors for healing rituals, long before the white man had drawn borders across their sacred land. The Apache woman dismounted, lowering the cowboy to the ground near the water. His breathing was ragged, but his pulse still beat, faint, stubborn, unyielding. She crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the darkness. The rider's sounds grew louder now, voices carried by the wind, the unmistakable creak of saddles, the jingle of spurs. They were closer than she had hoped. She drew her knife, the blade gleaming like moonlight on bone. It was small comfort against rifles, but she had other weapons, the land itself. The canyon knew her. It was her ally, her refuge, and her battlefield. She moved quickly, gathering dry brush and scattering it across the path. Then she knelt near the stream, her hands working swiftly with flint and steel. Moments later, a spark leapt into flame. She fed it, guiding the fire along the brush until it caught, flaring bright and angry. Smoke rose in thick waves, curling into the narrow canyon and spreading like a shroud. It would not stop the riders for long, but it would buy her time. She returned to the cowboy, lifting his head gently. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she thought he might wake. But his body was too weak, too drained. She covered him with a blanket of hides, shielding him from the chill that crept through the canyon floor. Then she looked once more toward the canyon mouth. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing eyes that had known too much loss, too much war, yet still refused to yield. The riders' voices grew louder. The first torch appeared through the smoke, wavering like a false dawn. She gripped her knife tighter, her breath slow and steady, and then a sudden sound. Not from the riders, but from deeper, within the canyon, a low rolling rumble that grew quickly into something vast. The ground trembled beneath her feet. She glanced toward the cliffside and understood. The heat from the fire had loosened the brittle rock above. With a final crack, the cliff face gave way. The night exploded in a roar of dust and stone. Rocks tumbled down like thunder, sealing the canyon behind her in a storm of noise and fury. When the echoes faded, silence returned, heavy and complete. The riders' shouts were gone, buried beyond the collapse. The Apache woman stood still for a long time, breathing hard, her knife still in her hand. The canyon had chosen its side. She turned back to the cowboy, who now slept as if untouched by the chaos. The fire cast its light upon him, upon his scars, his weariness, and the faint trace of life still clinging to him. She sat beside him once more, the flames flickering against her face. The danger had passed for now, but the night was not done testing them. Above, the stars burned brighter than ever, as though watching what destiny had begun to weave. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the armor of survival and loss, something stirred. Something that frightened her more than the riders ever could. Something like connection. The wind carried the scent of rain from far away, and with it, the promise of a dawn neither of them could yet see. The dawn crept slowly into the canyon, pale and uncertain, brushing the jagged stones with the soft light of survival. Smoke from the dying fire hung low over the ground, and the scent of wet earth carried through the air, the promise of rain that had yet to come. The Apache woman stirred from where she sat, her back against the stone wall. The night had been long, but she had not slept much. She watched the cowboy with wary eyes, the way one might watch a wounded animal, uncertain whether it would recover or turn wild when it did. Caleb Reed lay where she had left him, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. The fever had come in the small hours, a silent battle that left his face pale and glistening with sweat. She had fought it with the herbs she carried in a small leather pouch, herbs gathered from the high mesas where her ancestors once sang to the wind. She had seen many men die from wounds less deep, yet somehow this one still clung to life. The woman moved to the edge of the stream and knelt to wash her hands. The water was cold, cutting through the fatigue that had settled in her bones. When she looked up, the canyon stretched before her, vast, scarred, and silent once more. The rockslide she had caused the night before had sealed the only known way in or out for now. They were safe. But isolation in the desert was never truly safety. It was a waiting game between hunger, time, and fate. As the sun rose higher, warmth began to seep into the canyon. The woman checked the cowboy's wound again. It had begun to close, though the flesh was still angry and red. His breathing steadied, but the fever lingered in waves. She placed a damp cloth on his forehead and studied him. This stranger, this pale-eyed man who had stumbled into her world and changed its rhythm without meaning to. She wondered who he was before the desert had claimed him. His coat, torn and dusty, still bore the faint imprint of a deputy's badge. It told a story of law, of duty, and perhaps of betrayal. She could see the wear of miles on his boots, the scars on his hands. Marks not of weakness, but of endurance. He had known hardship, maybe loss, that much. She could read in the set of his jaw even in sleep. The sun climbed higher, burning the chill from the air. She fed the fire again and began to prepare what little food she carried. Dried meat, wild roots, and the hard bread made from mesquite flour. Her life was one of motion and scarcity, and she had learned never to rely on abundance. Still, she set aside half for him. Hours passed. The world outside their small refuge remained silent. Yet the silence did not ease her. The canyon might have hidden them from men, but not from the land itself. The desert was alive, watching, listening. By midday the cowboy stirred. His head turned toward the fire, his lips parting in a faint murmur she could not understand. His eyes opened briefly, clouded by exhaustion and pain. Then they closed again, his body surrendering once more to rest. The woman sat near him, unmoving, her expression unreadable. She knew that when he woke for real there would be questions, the kind that words could not easily answer. Why had she saved him? What did she want from him? And what kind of man had he been before the bullet and the blood? The Apache woman did not seek answers. She lived by a different code, one older than the white man's laws. But even she could not deny the strange pull that had begun to take root inside her. She told herself it was duty. The same kind that drove her to heal any wounded soul who crossed her path. Yet there was something more, something unfamiliar, dangerous and alive. Afternoon shadows stretched long across the canyon floor. The air shimmered with heat, and the whisper of wind through the rocks sounded almost like voices. Echoes of those who had walked these lands long before. She could feel them, the spirits of her ancestors, watching. Some would not approve of what she had done, saving a white man, bringing him into their sacred ground. Others, perhaps, would understand. By evening, the light softened again, and a faint breeze carried the scent of sage and smoke. The woman climbed a small ledge overlooking the canyon's entrance, and scanned the horizon. The dust had settled. No movement, no tracks. The men who had hunted them must have turned back or perished beneath the fallen rocks. Yet she knew better than to trust appearances. The white men who wore stars and hunted bounties did not give up easily. When she returned to the fire, the cowboy was awake. His gaze was clearer now, though still heavy with fatigue. He moved slightly, testing the strength in his limbs. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the slow dawning of memory. He tried to sit but failed, the effort leaving him trembling. The woman steadied him with a firm hand, guiding him back down. His breathing steadied again. He seemed to understand in his silence that he owed her his life, a debt that the desert itself had witnessed. Night fell once more, deep and vast. The stars returned, sharp and endless above the canyon walls. The woman sat by the fire, her long hair loose, now reflecting the faint shimmer of the flames. Across from her, the cowboy rested again, eyes half open, watching her through the glow. Neither spoke, but words were unnecessary. The silence between them had its own language, a fragile truce born of survival. As the fire burned lower, the woman reached into her pouch and scattered dried herbs into the flames. They hissed softly, releasing a thin smoke that carried upward, twisting toward the stars. It was a prayer, not for herself, but for balance. For the courage to walk whatever path fate had set before her. The cowboy's breathing deepened again, fading into sleep. The woman remained awake, listening to the rhythm of the desert night. The call of a lone coyote, the rustle of wind through stone. Her gaze drifted to the man lying beside the fire, and she wondered if perhaps their fates were now bound by something larger than choice. The desert had taken so much from her, her people, her home, her peace. But maybe, in its cruel way, it had given her something back, a reminder that life still had meaning, even in the ruins. Far above, the moon slipped behind a thin veil of clouds. The canyon darkened, and though the night was still, the air carried a new tension, subtle, almost invisible, but real. Somewhere beyond the collapsed pass, men still hunted. They would not rest until they had what they came for. And deep in the canyon, under the silent stars, two lives, one broken by loss, one shaped by survival, had begun to intertwine in ways neither of them could yet understand. The storm that had spared them once was not done. It was only gathering strength. The morning light crept through the narrow cracks of the canyon, falling across the cowboy's face like a silent reckoning. The fever had broken during the night, leaving behind only the faint tremors of exhaustion and the ache of a body that had seen too much pain. For the first time since she had found him, the Apache woman saw true awareness in his eyes. The kind that comes not just from waking, but from remembering.
Caleb Reed lay still for a long while, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the canyon. The whisper of the stream, the distant call of a hawk, the faint crackle of dying embers. He could feel the weight of his memories pressing against him like stones. He had been a lawman once, sworn to justice and honor, but the badge he wore had been turned against him. Men he trusted had framed him, twisting his duty into crime. Now he was no longer Caleb Reed, deputy of Silver Creek. He was a hunted man. The Apache woman moved with silent precision nearby, gathering herbs and stones. Her motions fluid as water. She did not look at him, yet she knew he was watching. There was no need for words between them, not yet. They both understood silence better than speech. As the sun climbed higher, she tended to his wound again, her touch steady but firm. The cut had begun to heal, though the scar would mark him forever. He watched her hands as she worked, strong hands, calloused by survival, yet capable of care. He wondered what kind of life she had lived before this, what loss had carved such stillness into her face. By midday the cowboy managed to sit upright, though every muscle protested. The woman had given him water, and a strip of dried meat, and for the first time in days, his strength began to return. Yet the ache in his chest was deeper than the wound, a hollow guilt that no medicine could cure. He remembered the last town he rode through. The faces of those who once called him friend, now turned cold and fearful. He remembered the sheriff who had ordered his arrest, the same man who had betrayed him to the outlaws for gold. Caleb had refused to play along with their lies, and for that they had branded him a murderer. He had fled into the desert, hunted like an animal, until fate, or perhaps something greater, had led him into the path of this woman. The Apache woman sensed the shift in him as surely as she sensed the changing wind. She saw the look in his eyes, the faraway stare of a man haunted by what he could not undo. She had seen it before, in warriors and widows, in those who carried ghosts too heavy to set down. As evening approached, she rose and climbed one of the canyon's ridges, her form outlined against the setting sun. From there, she could see the vast horizon, the world stretching endlessly in every direction, painted in gold and crimson. She felt the pull of it, the restlessness that came from too many years of loss. Below, the cowboy tried to stand. His legs trembled, but he did not fall. He walked slowly to the stream, kneeling beside it. His reflection stared back at him. A stranger's face, gaunt and weary. The man he had been was gone, buried beneath sand and betrayal. The woman watched him from above, and though her face remained unreadable, something in her eyes softened. The land had taken so much from both of them. Yet here, in this quiet canyon, something fragile was beginning to grow. Not love, not yet, but a recognition of shared pain. That night the air grew cooler, and the fire burned low between them. The woman sat in her usual place, her knife glinting faintly at her side. The cowboy lay near the warmth, staring up at the sky where 1,000 stars shimmered like watchful eyes. He thought of the men who were still out there hunting him. They would not stop. The law had long arms, and gold made men patient. He knew he could not stay hidden forever. The desert was wide, but word traveled farther. One day soon the past would find him. The Apache woman seemed to know this too. Her gaze flicked often toward the canyon walls, toward the direction from which danger would come. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, told her that silence never lasted long in the Wild West. Sooner or later, something or someone always broke it. When dawn returned, the cowboy woke to find her already saddling the mare. She moved with quiet determination, securing her packs and checking the sky for signs of weather. The air carried the dry scent of dust, and the horizon shimmered with heat. The cowboy, though still weak, rose to his feet. He felt the pull of the open plains beyond the canyon, calling to him with both promise and peril. He knew the woman could leave him behind now. Her debt, if she saw it that way, was paid, yet she made no move to abandon him. She turned, her expression calm but resolute. Without words, she offered her hand, guiding him toward the horse. The gesture was simple, but in it was something profound, a decision to see him through whatever lay ahead. The cowboy climbed onto the mare behind her, his hands gripping the saddle for balance. The sun broke over the cliffs, flooding the canyon with light. For a moment everything was golden. The horse, the rocks, the two figures silhouetted against the dawn. They rode slowly toward the far end of the canyon, where a narrow passage opened into the wilderness beyond. The wind carried the sound of their journey, the steady rhythm of hooves, the whisper of cloth, the faint sigh of breath, shared between two survivors. The land before them stretched wide and merciless, filled with promise and danger alike. The cowboy did not know where she would lead him. Perhaps toward safety, perhaps toward another fight. But he knew one thing with certainty: she was not just a stranger anymore. She was the reason he still drew breath. As they rode out, the canyon behind them fell silent once more, holding the memory of what had been. Far in the distance, on the ridge beyond sight, a small plume of dust rose against the horizon, the unmistakable sign of riders. The hunt was not over, and as the Apache woman guided the horse into the open desert, her eyes never once left the horizon. She knew the storm was returning, this time, not from nature, but from men. The peace of the canyon was gone. Ahead lay a reckoning neither of them could escape. The desert stretched endless before them, a sea of sun, baked earth and shadowed mesas that looked older than time itself. The morning light burned hot against their backs as the Apache woman led the mare through the open plains. Her movements measured and calm, while the cowboy rode behind her, his body still weak but steadier than before. The canyon that had hidden them was now far behind, swallowed by the horizon. Ahead lay miles of uncertain ground, and somewhere beyond the ridges, death rode with a familiar face. The plume of dust that had risen at dawn was no mirage. The men hunting them were closing in. The woman sensed it long before the cowboy did. Every shift of wind, every distant echo carried meaning to her, the language of the land she had been born to read. Her instincts whispered danger, though she showed no sign of fear. She rode with quiet resolve, her dark braids catching the sunlight like woven strands of night. By midday, the heat shimmered across the plains, turning the air into liquid gold. They stopped near a cluster of dry mesquite trees where a shallow pool of water glimmered faintly beneath the rocks. The woman dismounted first, helping the cowboy down. His breath came heavy, his wound aching from the long ride, but there was no complaint in his eyes, only determination. They rested in silence, sharing what little water and food remained. The Apache woman kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching for the faint signs that only she could read. Her horse pawed nervously at the ground, nostrils flaring. The wind shifted. The land fell quiet, too quiet. Even the buzz of insects faded away. Then, faint but certain, came the sound of hooves. It began as a low murmur, a vibration beneath the earth. Then it grew steady, rhythmic, inevitable. The woman's eyes hardened. She rose slowly, retrieving her bow from its leather sheath and stringing it with calm precision. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, unhurried. She had faced danger before, and the desert had taught her that panic served no one. The cowboy reached for the rifle she had tied across the saddle. His hands were unsteady, but his will was sharp. He checked the chamber, only 2 bullets left. It would have to be enough. From beyond the ridge, the riders appeared, 5 of them. Dark figures silhouetted against the glare of the sun. They rode hard and fast, their dust trailing like a ghostly veil behind them. The woman and the cowboy exchanged a glance that said what words never could. There would be no running now. The woman moved first, leading her horse behind a cluster of rocks. She crouched low, scanning the open ground ahead. The cowboy followed her lead, finding a vantage point slightly above. The riders approached without hesitation, confident and loud, the kind of men who believed the world belonged to them. When the first of them came within range, the woman released an arrow. It flew swift and silent, striking true. The rider toppled from his horse, crashing into the sand with a dull thud. The others pulled back in surprise, shouting to one another as they drew their guns. The stillness of the desert shattered into thunder. Gunfire cracked across the plains, echoing off the rocks. Dust and smoke rose in swirling ghosts as the battle began. The cowboy fired once, the bullet finding its mark in the chest of another rider. Then again, wounding a third before the rifle clicked empty. He dropped behind the rocks, reloading with trembling fingers, his breath ragged. The Apache woman moved like wind and shadow, firing, shifting, vanishing, reappearing from another angle. Her arrows sang through the air, each one a whisper of vengeance. But the riders were skilled and relentless. They spread out, circling the rocks, firing from all sides. The air filled with the hiss of bullets and the hiss of the desert wind. One shot struck close, splintering stone beside her. Another grazed her shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood. She did not falter. Pain was nothing new to her. It was part of the rhythm of survival. The cowboy, seeing her wounded, surged to his feet. He lifted the rifle again, took aim at the rider closest to her, and fired. The man tumbled backward, his gun falling uselessly from his grasp. But before Caleb could duck back down, another shot rang out. The bullet tore through the air, striking him across the ribs. The impact threw him hard against the rock. He fell, gasping, the world spinning. The Apache woman turned at the sound, a flash of fear in her eyes quickly buried beneath resolve. She ran to him, crouching low, the battle still raging around them. She pressed her hand to his wound, feeling the warmth of his blood against her palm. The remaining riders regrouped, their leader shouting orders. He was a broad man, his hat low, his voice sharp and cruel. The name Reed carried on the wind shouted with venom. These were not bounty hunters. They were the same lawmen who had once called him brother. The woman understood then that this fight was not hers alone. It was his reckoning. The ghosts of his betrayal come to finish what they had started. She rose once more, bow in hand, her face a mask of defiance. With the last of her arrows, she took aim and released. The arrow flew straight, piercing the leader through the throat. He fell from his saddle, dragging another rider down with him. The final 2 men turned to flee, fear replacing fury. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust as they vanished into the horizon. The battlefield fell silent once more. Only the sound of wind and the shallow breaths of the wounded broke the stillness. The Apache woman dropped her bow and hurried to the cowboy's side. He was still conscious, but barely. The wound was deep, yet not fatal. His body trembled from blood loss and exhaustion. She tore a strip of cloth from her tunic and pressed it firmly against the wound, her hands steady despite the pounding in her chest. They remained there for a long while, 2 souls bound by fate and survival, surrounded by the silence of the dying day. The sun sank low, washing the desert in crimson light. The battlefield around them glowed like a painting of fire and sorrow. As the first stars appeared, the woman lifted her gaze to the horizon where the riders had fled. She knew they would return with more. They always did. The world beyond the canyon still wanted him dead, and by saving him again, she had tied her own fate to his. The cowboy's breath steadied, his strength flickering like the last ember of a dying flame. She knew they could not stay here. She rose slowly, helping him onto the horse once more. The mare, loyal and patient, stood firm beneath their combined weight. The desert night had begun to fall, cool, vast, and filled with whispers. The woman turned the horse toward the distant mountains, where shadows waited like secrets. Behind them, the sand drank the blood of both friend and foe, erasing the traces of battle as though the earth itself sought to forget. Ahead, the unknown waited, and in its silence, a promise neither of them yet understood. They rode on beneath the rising moon, two silhouettes bound together by blood, loss, and the relentless call of destiny, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another storm was already stirring, darker, heavier, and far from over. The dawn broke soft and gold over the far ridges, painting the desert in the faint shimmer of rebirth. The air was cool, thin, and clear, that brief, fragile hour between the death of night and the blaze of day. The horse moved slowly along the stony trail that wound toward the mountains, her hooves striking hollow echoes against the earth. Upon her back, the Apache woman rode with silent strength, and before her, leaning against her shoulder, the wounded cowboy clung to the rhythm of her heartbeat. The battle they had survived had drained the last of their strength. The desert behind them had swallowed the fallen, burying blood and dust in equal measure. There was no turning back. Ahead lay only the mountains, a land of exile, hidden springs, and forgotten tribes. She knew the way, for her people had once called those slopes home before the soldiers came and burned the valleys clean. Each step the horse took carried them deeper into the silence of survival. The cowboy's head rested against her chest, his breath shallow, his body weak but still alive. She could feel the weight of his struggle, not only against his wound, but against the ghosts that had hunted him for years. The men he had called brothers were gone now, their greed and hatred scattered like ashes on the wind. But the memory of what he'd done in their name still rode with him, heavy and unyielding. The woman did not speak, yet her eyes held the story of forgiveness that words could never shape. She had seen too many souls break beneath the weight of their pasts. She would not let this one die burdened by his. The path grew steeper, winding through a narrow gorge lined with red stone cliffs. High above, a hawk circled in lazy loops, its cry echoing faintly in the stillness. The horse's breathing grew labored, its pace slowing. The woman guided it gently, her hand steady on the reins. She could feel the air grow thinner, mountain air sharp and clean, touched by the scent of pine and wild sage. At last they reached a plateau, where the world opened wide before them. From this height, the desert stretched endless and pale beneath the rising sun, an ocean of gold and sorrow. Here, in this place between earth and sky, the woman decided they would rest. She dismounted, lowering the cowboy carefully onto a patch of grass that clung stubbornly to life among the stones. His skin was pale beneath the morning light, his pulse faint. She tore strips of cloth from her shawl, cleaning his wound again, pressing cool water from her canteen against his lips. The man stirred slightly, a flicker of consciousness returning. She saw it then, the glint of life refusing to fade. The hours passed slowly. The woman gathered dry branches, building a small fire to keep the cold of altitude away. The crackle of the flames mingled with the whisper of the wind as she watched over him. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low, promising rain before nightfall. As the day aged, clouds gathered over the western rim. A storm was forming, vast, dark, and beautiful. The woman watched it come, sensing the rhythm of the world shift again. Change always began with a storm in these lands. She had learned that long ago. By late afternoon, the cowboy was awake, his eyes opened to the sight of the mountains rising like gods around him, and the woman seated nearby, still and strong against the light. For a long time neither moved. The silence between them was deeper than words, the kind of silence shared only by those who have bled together, ridden through death, and come out on the other side. He tried to stand, and she helped him, her arm around his shoulders. Together, they walked to the edge of the plateau. From there, they could see everything, the place they had escaped, the scars of the desert, and the winding line of the river that cut through the land like a silver blade. It was the first time in days that the cowboy's gaze was not filled with pain. For a brief moment, peace touched his face. The woman knew that moment was worth every risk. As evening approached, the storm broke. The wind howled down from the peaks, carrying sheets of rain that swept across the land in wild waves. The fire hissed and died, but neither of them moved from their place. The rain washed the blood from their clothes, the dust from their skin, and the weight of the world from their hearts. In that storm, it was as if the desert itself sought to cleanse them, to give back what life had taken away. The cowboy's strength slowly returned in the days that followed. They built a small shelter among the rocks, where the woman taught him the ways of her people, how to read the wind, how to move with the land instead of against it, how to listen to silence until it spoke. He learned to hunt again, to heal, to live without the noise of guilt chasing him. The bond between them grew not from words, but from shared survival, from the quiet gestures that needed no explanation. When he worked beside her, mending the shelter or gathering herbs, there was a calm between them that no fire could burn away. She was his savior, his guide through a world he had never truly seen until now. Seasons changed. The first snow came late that year, blanketing the peaks in white silence. Their camp became a sanctuary of peace, untouched by the chaos of men. Yet the world below had not forgotten them. Whispers traveled across towns and outposts, of an outlaw still living, of an Apache woman who rode with him. Some called it a curse, others a legend. One cold morning, smoke rose again on the horizon. Riders, the world they had fled was coming to claim them one last time. The woman saw them first. There were many this time. Lawmen, bounty hunters, and the ghosts of vengeance made flesh. She turned to the cowboy, her expression calm, her eyes fierce with the same fire she'd carried since the canyon. He understood without a word. Together they prepared. The storm of men and gunfire that followed was swift and brutal. The mountains roared with thunder and rage. When it ended, the earth was silent again. When the sun rose the next day, the riders were gone. Only the woman's horse stood at the ridge, its reins trailing in the wind. At the base of the plateau, where the storm had torn through the land, there were two figures lying close. The cowboy and the Apache woman, side by side, their hands touching, their faces peaceful.